and welcome to Ag PhD. I'm Darren Hefty.
And I'm Brian Hefty. Thanks for joining us today. We've got a great show for you. We're going to talk a little about 2019 and the year in review. Yes, on your farm it might have been challenging. I know it was on our farm, but there were certainly some lessons we can take out of 2019 to make every year going forward that much better.
You know, one challenge, Brian, we'll focus on a little more specifically on today's show is getting the most out of glufosinate or Liberty. It's getting used in many different applications around the country. One of them is in burn down to start the season off. We'll talk about some tips to make it work the best.
Well, we've got an interesting Weed of the Week coming up later in the show and an iron talk as well. But first, here's this week's Farm Basics.
You spend all year working hard to get as much yield as possible at harvest. The last thing you want to do is put your grain in the bin and have it spoil before you take it to market. Introducing the Grain Temp Guard from Farm Shop MFG. Designed and built by a farmer looking for a low-cost monitoring solution for existing bins, the Grain Temp Guard tracks temperature and humidity with an alarm system to alert you when your grain exceeds safe thresholds. For more information on a system for your bins, visit farmshopmfg.com.
During our Farm Basics time today, we're going to talk about ethanol, and specifically corn ethanol, what part of the kernel is actually used and what part is left over.
Well, we're standing in some corn stubble today, and I think about cellulosic ethanol, that someday that may be a bigger portion of this, where we're actually using some of the stalk and some of the cellulose in the stalk to make the ethanol. That is happening on a smaller scale around the world today. But more commonly right now in the United States, we're using the kernels of corn to make ethanol. And right there, you think about that ear of sweet corn. Let me just tell you to begin with, this is not your ear of sweet corn. That is an entirely different type of corn than what we're discussing.
Yeah, so we're talking about number 2 yellow corn here. And the whole thing is, when that goes into the ethanol plant, all they're taking out of that is the starch. You have to think about that kernel as being not just starch. There's a whole bunch of other good stuff in there. There's fat, there's protein, there are vitamins. Everything else is left over. All they're pulling out is the starch. And when you stop and think about it, where does number 2 yellow corn typically go in the United States? It goes to animal feed, predominantly to cattle. Well, are the cattle actually using that starch? No. In a lot of cases, they're not. So here's the whole thing. When you go back just a few years, there was this talk about food versus fuel. Well, that's absolute nonsense. That's ridiculous. It should be food and fuel, because what the livestock actually really need is still left after this process happens of making corn ethanol and pulling the starch out. If people want more starch, it's real easy. Just bale up some corn stalks, mix that starch in together with what's left over, the distiller's grain is what it's called, and now you're right back to 100%. So there is no food versus fuel, it's food and fuel.
Well, when you take those corn kernels, crack them open, add some enzymes and water, it quickly converts that starch into sugars, which then yeast can be added to convert those sugars into alcohol. It's a very simple process. It's being used around the world with a number of crops, including corn. It's a quick and easy way to make fuel, and certainly it is a renewable fuel. It's a resource that is not going to run out, and we can make more of it each year.
And just a couple other misconceptions here. Number one, a lot of people think that there's all this government subsidy going to ethanol. No, there isn't. There's none. So when you look at government subsidies, it's not needed for corn ethanol. This is a very inexpensive fuel to make. So it's great for the farmer. It's great actually for the livestock producer, because the distiller's grain, the stuff that's left over after you pull the starch out, is super nutritious feed. So we all like that. And the ethanol that's made in the end is the best fuel there is. It is renewable, like Darren said, but also it's not an environmental hazard like gasoline. It's also not a cancer causer like gasoline.
Well, as you're driving by cornfields out in the country, one thing I hope you don't notice is our Weed of the Week. Can you identify this week's weed?
Tough, precise, efficient. Strip tillage with the Soil Warrior brings the future to your farm. Learn more at soilwarrior.com/agphd.
If you're looking to expand your farm's grain handling, you want everything to be fast and efficient. The Quick Belt from Norwood Sales is your all-around grain handling solution. Our conveyor-based system uses an 18-inch belt and a 10-inch tube, which minimizes seed damage while moving more than 10,000 bushels an hour. That's fast enough to fill a semi in 6 minutes. Plus, our hood is designed to gently direct the flow of grain straight down, keeping your crop in condition. Keep your grain and your farm moving with the Quick Belt from Norwood Sales.
Avoid dry run failures with the new Hi-Pro Force Field pump. Providing the ultimate protection, this wet seal pump will save you on costly in-season downtime to keep your sprayer running. Now all you have to worry about is the weather. Hi-Pro, helping you spray better.
In 1949, Morton Buildings constructed our first machine storage building to establish our bond with the farming community. Since then, our relationship has grown, and so have our product offerings. From the smallest specialized operation to the largest agricultural enterprise, we understand the needs of your business and continue to evolve to meet industry demands. Plus, when you build a Morton building, you're backed by the strongest warranty in the business. To learn more about the Morton Advantage, visit mortonbuildings.com.
Do you feel like there's never enough time to get everything done before planting? The window for spring work is quick and unforgiving. Give yourself the upper hand with the ProTill High Performance High Speed Disc. More and more farmers agree the ProTill is the right tool for spring field conditions and heavy residue management. Zero maintenance bearings, independent disc technology, oversized pins and bushings allow the ProTill to handle whatever field or conditions you can throw at it. Degelman High Performance Equipment.
During our show today, we're going to talk a little about the 2019 year in review. So we want to talk today about what we can learn from 2019 and how we can improve our farms because of that going forward.
Let's start at planting time, Brian. It was wet, and I had a local radio personality tease me a little bit. He said, "Why are you farmers complaining? You had the widest planting window you've ever had. You planted from April until the end of June and even into July." And of course, we all know that's not a good thing when we can't get planting done timely. Here's one of the challenges though with that planting is hybrid maturity and switching hybrids. We had a lot of farmers that switched hybrids multiple times during the year, just kept hoping, hey, we're gonna get in this week, and nope, it didn't happen. Hey, we're gonna get in the next week, and again, it didn't happen. And by the time you start taking a 110-day intended hybrid and you get in there a month or two late, well, you're down in the 95-day category. Now, some farmers just refused to switch, and that turned out to be a big mistake this year. One thing that I learned in 2019 is you really do have to move back in hybrid maturity. It is going to make a big difference. You're not going to catch up later in the season in most cases. And here's the other thing, you really aren't giving up that much yield. Now, if you're going to plant 110-day corn in a 110-day environment against a 95-day hybrid, I would expect that 110-day corn to win almost 100% of the time. However, if you're planting that 110-day corn a month late, all of a sudden I would expect the 95-day hybrid to win. Not only did we see better test weights, we sometimes saw better overall yield to begin with. So it's something not to be afraid of going forward. Switch back in maturities, and even as you build your plan for this year, if you still have some wet ground going into the winter, well, you're probably going to have some wet ground in the spring, so you should be taking some portion of your farm to earlier hybrids with your initial order as well.
Way back in 2007, we bought our first tile plow for our farm. And I just remember back then our dad had some advice for us on tile. Well, his advice when we first bought our tile plow was, if you have the money, put in bigger tile than you need and put in more tile than you think you need. Because he said, in my entire life, I've never run into a farmer who said, I put in too much tile. He said every single farmer always says, I don't put enough tile in. Well, sure enough, on our farm, we had been tiling for years and years for 20 to 25 inches of total annual precip like we normally get. Well, in 2018 and 2019, we got 40 inches. 40. We were not set up for 40 inches. We should have put more tile in.
One other thing that was really prevalent in 2019 that offered us the chance to learn some lessons the hard way was disease pressure. Now, there are a number of them that we could talk about. Certainly white mold this year in soybeans and edible beans and sunflowers was really horrible in the northern part of the country. frog-eye leaf spot was absolutely terrible this year through much of the country, and that even crept a long ways north. And of course, tar spot is something that on years like we had in 2019 was a real problem, and it spread into new areas in the United States that farmers are going to have to start managing for tar spot as well.
One of the biggest things I saw in 2019 is what a difference seed treatments made. Because the spring was colder and wetter than normal, you could really see a difference between the great seed treatments and the average ones, or especially the great seed treatments and the poor ones or the untreated soybeans that were out there. As farmers, we need great seed treatment products. And the nice thing here in the last few years, we've seen new and better fungicides come along, and we have seen a lot more biological, or as we call them, natural products come along. We're to the point now we have 33 seed treatments on the seed corn that we plant. 33. You think about that, it sounds absolutely crazy, but because of that, we've been able to shorten the time that it takes to get that seed out of the ground. Instead of 100 growing degree units like we normally figure, we're down to 75 or 80 GDUs to pop that seed out of the ground. And the other thing along with that is we're perfectly comfortable planting when the soil temps are 40 degrees now instead of 50. The old thing was when you're going to plant your corn, it's got to be 50-degree soil temps. You absolutely do not need to do that now if you've got the very best seed treatments. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not saying mud your crop in. The ground has to be fit. But if it's cold, no big deal. The new seed treatments can push your corn even when the soil temp is cold.
And speaking of planting, we're going to spend more time this winter talking about what a difference getting the planter set correctly made this year in 2019. Now, you may say, well, sure it did because we had such horrible soil conditions for a lot of the season and we planted into some stuff we maybe shouldn't have. Well, that may be part of the reason, but even with all the new technology that's going into planters, it still takes a farmer that's really crafty with getting things set and adjusting for the conditions. And we saw some huge variability, even row to row on a planter going through the same soil conditions. So don't kid yourself, it wasn't just, 2019 was a bad year. There are some things we need to change even for good soil conditions with our planters.
The last thing I've got is just all the lodging and green snap issues we saw in 2019. I saw more green snap in 2019 than I've ever seen in my life, and it's not even close. Well, part of the reason I think we had this problem is because people were planting corns that don't normally fit in that area. It was earlier corns. There was a big rush to get that corn growing. The wind came at just the wrong time. There was a lot of fertility that was going to get applied but didn't get applied in both 2018 and 2019 because everything was so wet. So you start adding all these factors up and you go, oh, okay, yeah, it is starting to make sense why we've had an issue. Well, I will just tell you this, if you've got a lodging or a green snap problem, or if you've had this in the past on your farm, it's most likely a fertility issue. Now, I realize the tendency is to blame the seed dealer. It's not the seed corn's fault, okay? It's usually a fertility problem. Now, I'm not saying that the variety doesn't make a difference, it does, but I'm just saying everything will be better if you make your fertility better. So what I would challenge you to do in any area, in any crop, if you've got a lodging or fertility problem, go soil test there. I'm going to bet that you've got low K, low manganese, low copper, or all three of those. With potassium, we're really shooting for 4 to 8% base saturation K, and if you're going for big time yields, I'd say you need to be in the 6 to 8% base saturation K range. That's the #1 factor when it comes to green snap and lodging.
Well, yes, 2019 was not a very good year for many farms across the country, but what I do look at is where the lessons are that we could learn from, let's make the changes. In agriculture, too often, we continue to do things the same way and expect different results. We need to make some changes on our farm, learn from the lessons on your farm from 2019, and move forward with more success.
There were a lot of lessons to be learned in 2019 in terms of weed control as well. We'll talk about this week's Weed of the Week and how to stop it on your farm coming up later in the show.
I need results, so I choose the one system I trust to take weeds down and keep them down on even my toughest acres with the kind of yield potential that helps keep me in the black to deliver my kind of results season after season. I choose the Roundup Ready Xtend crop system. I choose results.
It's been remarkable what we've seen out of the varieties of Extend soybeans. The yield has come through for us.
We had the best soybean crop we've ever had. The yields were there.
With the Roundup Ready Extend crop system, the yield boost and the lack of weed pressure really helps our bottom line.
The technology has exceeded my expectations. It's one thing that the industry has been looking for years.
There's nothing like harvesting record crops.
How much yield and profit did you lose the moment you put your seed in the ground? A poor stand at planting keeps your crops from reaching their yield potential, and closing the seed trench behind the planter is essential to establishing a good crop stand. The Germinator Closing Wheel from Farm Shop MFG is here to give your crop the strong start it needs for maximum yield. Act now to receive an early order rebate plus free shipping. Get ready for spring planting with the Germinator Closing Wheel. For more information, visit farmshopmfg.com.
It's no secret that Mother Nature doesn't always cooperate with your schedule. Field conditions in recent years kept many from timely planting and fertilizing, and when you can't get your fertilizer applied, you lose thousands of dollars in yield potential. If you need flexibility in your fertility application timing, you need a drop tube system from C&R Supply. C&R drop tubes allow you to apply liquid nitrogen in season and place it exactly where your crop needs it. To learn more about low-cost C&R drop tube solutions, visit crsupply.com.
In 1949, Morton Buildings constructed our first machine storage building to establish our bond with the farming community. Since then, our relationship has grown, and so have our product offerings. From the smallest specialized operation to the largest agricultural enterprise, we understand the needs of your business and continue to evolve to meet industry demands. Plus, when you build a Morton building, you're backed by the strongest warranty in the business. To learn more about the Morton Advantage, visit mortonbuildings.com.
I have great news for you today. The Liberty herbicide price has come down. I don't care if we're talking generic glufosinate, name brand Liberty, the price is less expensive. That's exciting to me because we're going to see a lot of Liberty sprayed on soybeans, we're going to see a lot of Liberty sprayed on corn, we're going to see a lot of Liberty sprayed in burn down situations just like we had 5-6 years ago before the price started going up. But here's the thing, Liberty is a lot different product than Roundup. If you don't want to use Roundup, you don't want to use Gramoxone as your burn down or in crop for Roundup, whatever, you're switching to Liberty, well, you need to use this product the right way. We're going to talk today about how to get the most effectiveness out of the dollars you invest in glufosinate.
First of all, you're going to need different spray tips to spray Liberty or glufosinate than you are with most of the products that you're using on your farm. Think about it like this. If you're spraying dicamba or if you're spraying Roundup or glyphosate, you've got big droplets, you're concerned about drift, and you're trying to just get some big droplets on, just a few of them on the plant, because that's going to be enough to kill it in most cases. Liberty doesn't work like that at all. Number one, we don't have the volatility concerns with Liberty. We're not worried about it moving off target like we are with dicamba. We're also not as fussy about the drift as we are with Roundup. Now, don't get me wrong, we don't want to spray in a 20-mile-an-hour wind, but it's not near the problem that Roundup is. We need smaller droplets with Liberty in order to get weed control, and we aren't as concerned about what kind of negative impact that can have. Now, I'm not saying you want the tiniest little fines that are going to blow away, but I am saying you want to get to that medium-sized droplet, maybe even a little bit smaller, so you can get great coverage on the weeds.
The other thing is using more water. With glyphosate, we want less water. With glufosinate or Liberty, we want more water. You've got to have a lot of water, a lot of spray pressure, and really blast that Liberty or glufosinate down to every last leaf you can possibly touch on the plant. Liberty does not move in the plant the same way that glyphosate does. With glyphosate, if you get enough of a dose on any leaf, it will move throughout that plant. It just doesn't work that way, unfortunately, with Liberty. You've got to kind of coat that plant. So when you hear that, you might think, oh, Liberty's a terrible product. No, it's a great product. We love Liberty. It just has to be sprayed a little bit different, and it can work extremely well.
The other big difference with Liberty is when it comes to spray additives. We've heard a lot of talk about ammonium sulfate over the last few years about, hey, we probably should be taking ammonium sulfate out of the tank. And that's true anytime you have dicamba in the tank, whether it's sprayed alone or in a tank mix, you've got to take the ammonium sulfate out. It actually increases volatility with dicamba. However, with Liberty, It's a very important process of how the Liberty actually works. It needs that ammonium in there in order for the Liberty to kill the weed.
The last thing I'll throw in here with Liberty is it really likes sunny days and warm temperatures. So if you're out there and it's cold, if you're out there and it's cloudy, you may not get the same effectiveness. So as much as you can, spray when it's sunny and warm.
So here's the key points to remember when it comes to Liberty or glufosinate. It's an excellent herbicide. We love the product. It still does a very good job. There are no weeds known to be resistant to this product. The keys to a successful application are use smaller droplet size, use more gallons of water for carrier, make sure to add ammonium sulfate. We like to see 3 pounds of ammonium sulfate per acre, and then spray the Liberty at a full rate on warm days with sunshine. If you do all those things, you'll be super happy with how your Liberty does this year.
Oh, one thing we should throw in here too is Liberty, like all herbicides, works better on smaller weeds. So don't let your weeds get a foot tall. Kill them when they are 2 to 4 inches tall. Follow the other things Darren just mentioned and you'll be happy with Liberty.
Well, and if you do all those things, you will definitely take control of our Weed of the Week. We'll show you what else will work on it coming up next.
The Weed of the Week is brought to you by Corteva Agriscience, Agriculture Division of Dow DuPont. Finish the fight against tough weeds with the Enlist Weed Control System.
Weeds are tough, but we're tougher. With unrivaled weed control, reduced drift, and near zero volatility. So, who's tough now?
Our Weed of the Week is pineapple weed. Now this is one I think of as a summer annual weed, but I guess it can be a winter annual as well. This is actually one of my kids' favorite weeds because they love to show other kids how to identify it. With pineapple weed, when it gets towards maturity, it actually puts on a yellow seed head. And if you squeeze that yellow seed head, when it gets good and yellow, it actually smells like pineapple. And once your children take a look at that and try it out and smell it, they're gonna say, wow, this is cool, I wanna show everybody. So there you go. There's a weed identification tip for pineapple weed.
Once you've identified it, now it's time to control it. There are actually a lot of herbicides other than just dicamba and 2,4-D that can control this weed, but we talk most probably about 2,4-D in farmyards, pastures, roadside ditches. But again, dicamba certainly could be used as well. The key thing here is just to make sure that you're using a decent rate. Don't try to get by with some tiny little rate. And kind of like Liberty that we were talking about earlier in the show, all herbicides work better when it's a little warmer. Quite often what we find is very late fall spraying or very early spring spraying, and people say, it's not the best. Well, the weather needs to be kind of warm. If the weather's in the 40s and 50s, it's not going to work the same as if the weather's in the 60s and especially 70s.
All right, if this weed does make it out into crop ground, it's typically in reduced till or no-till situations. I like our 3-pre strategy for soybeans with Prowl and Metribuzin and either Valor or Authority. Post-emergent soybeans, Roundup, Liberty, 2,4-D, dicamba, those things work great. Also, I would say Flex Star and Cobra are pretty effective if you get the weed when it's small.
All right, in corn, I would start with Verdict. I'd follow up post-emerge with Status and maybe a little bit of Atrazine. We go to wheat. I'd probably start with Sharpen and then follow later on with Husky.
That's all the time we have for this week's weed, pineapple weed, but Iron Talk is coming up next.
There are a lot of steps to having a perfect season. Don't let your fertilizer plan be the step that trips you up. No matter when you apply fertilizer, no matter how, AgroLiquid has the experts and the products that'll help you move closer to your target and hit the bullseye. AgroLiquid moves you closer to your target.
The whole spring and summer flooding that we've had, guess what? We lost 100% of that. You know, we're sitting with maybe only a third of our acres.
I want everything to be perfect, and especially this year, it's not going to happen.
There's been one specific lab I feel like is trying to copy what we're doing. I then asked the question. They looked at me like a deer in the headlights. They don't know.
More choices, more money. With Bayer Plus Rewards, you choose from our broad portfolio of high-performance products. Earn more money on the eligible products that are right for your farm. And use our new portal to see your purchases, track your rewards, and decide how you want to use them. Visit mybayerplus.com to sign in and start earning. That's the advantage of more control in your hands. That's the plus.
It starts with genetics, what you're made of. It takes agronomy. It's local. It's knowing your land and having the tools to put the right product in the right place. It's built on service with trust, grit, and determination. Because it turns out, what it takes to make the best product is a lot like what it takes to make a farmer. Golden Harvest, rooted in genetics, agronomy, and service.
You work hard and invest a lot of time and money to make your crop each year. Don't let that effort go to waste. Moisture loss from over-drying stored grain can cost you thousands for each percentage point lost. Get the Grain Temp Guard Alarm HT from Farm Shop MFG. The Alarm HT uses temperature and humidity sensors to alert you when conditions in your bin put your crop at risk. Don't shrink your profits. Learn more about this low-cost solution at farmshopmfg.com.
Iron Talk is brought to you by Case IH.
Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, whenever you want. In your life and on your farm, Case IH AFS Connect gives you more control. Monitor your operation, manage your fleet and your farm data your way. Case IH. Rethink productivity.
Weed control in soybeans is a big challenge for farmers across the country. Part of the solution is using pre-emerge herbicides. But what if you're using tillage as well? Today's Iron Talk will discuss the timing, tillage tool, and depth of incorporation needed to make your soybean herbicides work their best. Primary herbicides that require tillage are trifluralin and sonlin. You can use a field cultivator, a field finisher, or even a disc. They're very forgiving products in the soil, as both trifluralin and sonlin are root inhibitors. Now, the important thing here is that these products need to be instantly incorporated. Their vapor pressure is so high that if you don't work them in right away, some of the herbicide will be lost. To accomplish this, you'll need to install a spray kit on the front of your tillage tool to spray the herbicide literally on right in front of the tillage. The alternative to this is to buy Prowl instead. Now, it's similar chemistry to trifluralin and sonlin, except that you don't need to till it in at all. So Prowl's the no-till product, but if you do want to till it in, just keep it shallow with a field cultivator running fast through the field. Valor and Authority products are in the PPO family and should either be left on the soil surface or very lightly incorporated. Metribuzin is a forgiving product that can either be tilled into the ground or left on the soil surface. The challenge is when you're mixing 3 different pre-emerge herbicides. Let's take, for example, if you're mixing Prowl and Authority MTZ, which contains Metribuzin and Authority. You can use them with tillage or just a very light incorporation an inch or 2 deep. How about a combination with trifluralin? Well, of course, you'll need to do tillage and you'll need to do it instantly. Again, we recommend the spray kit to get 100% effectiveness of the herbicide. The good thing about trifluralin is it will save you probably $5 or $6 an acre versus picking the no-till options and using Prowl. Pick the right herbicides and partner that with the optimum tillage system for excellent weed control on your farm this year. That's all for today's Iron Talk, and now back to the show.
That's all the time we have for today's show, but before we go, we want to invite you to check out the Ag PhD radio show. We're on at 2 p.m. Central each weekday on SiriusXM Channel 147.
And don't miss the next Ag PhD TV show. We'll have another Weed of the Week, Farm Basics, Iron Talk, and a whole lot more. I'm Darren Hefty.
And I'm Brian Hefty. Thanks for watching Ag PhD.